There are going to be dozens and dozens of YouTubers who are talking about this, so I figured I wanted to jump in with my 2 cents just to rub it in the faces of all of my detractors when it comes to Android phones versus iPhone. I've never bought in to the Android versus iPhone hype. As far as I'm concerned, Android phones compete with each other and they have to rush themselves to market with their new and better gimmicks in order to try to stand above the rest of the Android phones. As it stands, Samsung basically sits at the top of the Android market with other companies who make them who are probably not worth mentioning, but companies like Huawei and LG and whoever else makes Android phones. I really don't think about it because I don't care. But the simple fact of the matter is I know who the guy at the top is, and the guy at the top is Samsung. They sit at the top of the Android market. But what I don't buy is these Samsung phone versus iPhone competitions or whatever you want to call them, where they put these things on YouTube and they run them next to each other and they're like, oh yeah, well, can the iPhone outperform this? And first of all, anybody who buys into the Apple ecosystem is not buying into the Android ecosystem. There are some exceptions, like for instance, if you have an iPhone, most likely you're going to have an Apple Watch. If you have an Apple Watch and an iPhone, most likely if you bought a tablet, you're going to buy an iPad. That's because any apps that you buy on your Apple phone are going to carry over to your Apple iPad. And the same thing also might even apply for a laptop. Like if you're going to buy a laptop, most likely you're not going to go to Windows unless you're a gamer. Most likely you're going to go to Apple because you know that nobody else makes a product as small, as light, as high quality when it comes to, build quality. Now, Apple has had some missteps because obviously all their stuff is made in China. And as you know, China makes cheap plastic shit that for the most part doesn't always work properly. But the thing about it is eventually they're going to bring more and more of their production to other places that might do a better job. But the problem that they have is they want to keep that profit and they don't want to have to spend a lot of money. They'd rather pay these people $5 a day than to spend more money to get better build quality. Thing about it is their build quality is high enough where the free market has decided, okay, they make a good product, I'm going to keep going back and forth to them. Now, as for this Galaxy phone, this Galaxy Fold and the Huawei Mate X, these things are answers to a question nobody asked. Nobody was demanding a folding phone. First of all, it doesn't make sense because these things are thicker than regular phones, for one. Second of all, it doesn't make sense because now in order to have that folding phone, now you have to have a screen on the outside. Well, what was the point of the fold? Was it to protect the inside screen? Or was it so I have a 3-screen phone? It doesn't make sense. So these morons decide to put this thing out, and apparently they must have put it through testing for about a couple of minutes. And they decided, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to rush to the market. We're going to beat both Apple and Huawei. Meanwhile, Huawei has a $2,600 Mate X, which they were putting up against this thing. And now you're seeing the reason why this type of technology just doesn't make sense. First of all, glass doesn't fold. When you try to fold glass, it shatters. Glass does not fold. So that means that these things are made of plastic, cheap plastic. The edges of these things, apparently, people were looking at it and they thought it looked terrible and they thought it was like a packaging plastic. So they decided to try to rip it off and then found out that what they were ripping off was the actual display digitizer, or it was an integral part of the machine. And once they tore that thing off, your phone's gone. Sorry. Now, my guess is anybody who's broken their phone like this, their $2,000 waste of money Android crap, anybody who's bought this garbage, I'm thinking Samsung may refund their money or may give them a new phone. Thing about it is, this type of technology wasn't ready for prime time, which is the reason why I appreciate Apple. Apple doesn't rush stuff to market, or at least they try not to. What they do is they test it and test it and test it and test it, and once they're decided that it's good enough to go to market, that's when they release it. It's just like big screened iPhones. Once they put a big screen on the iPhone 6 Plus, at that point, it was like, as far as I'm concerned, they hit their climax. It was like after that, there wasn't really much else they were going to be able to do with the phone except make incremental improvements or change the size of the display, which they basically did with my 10s Max, where they made the entire display a front-facing display. And what also bothers me is that everybody who criticizes Apple about doing things like removing the headphone jack and removing this, removing that, or putting the notch on the phone. Well, my thing is, well, why are these Japanese companies and why are these Chinese companies copying Apple? So Apple takes the headphone display off. You criticize Apple, oh, they should have done this, blah, blah, blah. And then Samsung does it. So wait a minute. Why are you copying Apple? You're supposed to be the one who's out here doing everything all magic and fancy dancy, right? Oh, so Apple seals up the phone and makes it so you can't take the battery or the memory out. Oh, they criticize Apple for it. And then Samsung does it. And then the rest of them do it too. You know why? Because they don't want you being able to replace your real battery with them cheap-ass Chinese plastic batteries that are fake and blow up in planes like the Galaxy 7. Those things have blown people's faces clean off. They don't want you being able to do that. They don't want you being able to buy those cheap plastic Chinese memory cards. We go on eBay and they say, yeah, we got a 1 terabyte card for $10. You buy it and then you find out it's a reflashed 4 gigabyte card. It's like when Apple builds something, they do it right. Anybody who buys into Apple's ecosystem is going to keep buying into Apple's ecosystem. They're not going to Samsung. They damn sure ain't going to Huawei. As far as I'm concerned, them people are spies, according to what our government says. Them people are spies at Huawei. I ain't buying nothing from them at all. And then the last thing I got to say is, how come they always put the iPhone up against the newest Samsung? Samsung rushes their garbage to market, so that means that iPhones from last year are always in a competition with the Samsung of the new year. Well, wait a minute. What kind of competition is that? The A12 chip is faster than just about everything that every other company is pushing. And now that they have the A13 chip, you're going to have to go up against the brand newest Samsung. Yeah, I hope they put it up against this Fold, since that thing is broken already out of the box, basically. But it doesn't make sense. How are you comparing these two things? And oh, yeah, well, the Samsung has more memory and the Apple doesn't have as much memory. Yeah, well, that's because they inefficiently use memory. So you have to have more memory because you're inefficient. Apple puts what they need into the phone where it won't kill the battery, and it also is going to work efficiently. That's the word, efficiently. If you have 30 gigabytes of RAM and I've only got 4, but my phone outperforms yours 9 to 10, and 9 times out of 10 my phone's outperforming yours, then you mean to tell me the only thing you can do is open the apps faster after you've only opened them? You open the app, it gets stored into memory, and then you reopen it later on, and you're bragging about how fast your thing... All right, you know what? I'm not even going to bother complaining. I'm going to end with this. This stuff is garbage, and I'm glad to see it fail.